This is America, and this is the White House. It's from here that President Donald Trump has launched a new wave of strikes on Iran and has reimposed the blockade on Iranian ports. Is the president escalating a war that was supposed to be winding down, or is he simply trying to force Tehran back to the bargaining table on his terms? I'll have more on all of that in just a moment, but first, let's go to Alex Marquardt in our Washington, D.C. studio.
Thanks very much, Rosalind. Donald Trump often frames power dynamics as a simple balance. Which side holds the cards? With Iran, the U.S. commander-in-chief of the world's most powerful military is finding out that a strong hand isn't necessarily the same as a winning one. And somewhere in the middle here sits a ceasefire agreement that both sides now read differently, with 90 million Iranians and a global economy waiting to find out what happens next. 4 months into this war that Donald Trump said would take just a few weeks, he appears to be betting on escalation. Rory Challens looks at the options.
Trump's generals reportedly cautioned him against war with Iran. Too risky and too unpredictable. But the US president, he fancied the odds. And now, 4 months into a war he thought would last 4 to 5 weeks, the US is locked in a high-stakes contest with a questionable hand. Trump says the deal he signed with Iran is over. And now he's choosing escalation.
No, I gave them a chance. I wanted to give them a chance at making a deal. You know, we had a deal 2 days ago. It was done. And then all of a sudden, they couldn't do it. They didn't like something about the deal. They couldn't do it. And they shot first. And that was a big mistake that they shot first, because we have been knocking the hell out of them.
The cards he's played: new military strikes and restoring the blockade. For days, the US has bombed military targets across Iran. Trump says bridges and power plants are next. And the US Navy has restored its blockade in the Gulf of any ship trading with Iran. As ever, Trump wants to cash in, but announcing that he would charge international shipping for US protection through the Straits of Hormuz didn't sit well with allies.
I was called by different people, different countries, kings and emirs and all of the people that we all know and we all love, and they've been very strong partners. And they said, we'd love to do it a different way. We'd love to invest in the United States with billions and billions of dollars.
But what of Iran? It has cards too. Its proven willingness to absorb punishment, military and economic. And its ace, the ability to choke off the Hormuz Straits and send drones and missiles at US bases and regional allies. And there's another factor here: time. US midterm elections are in November. This war is unpopular with the public. Trump is impatient for something that looks like a victory. The world's most powerful military, a death toll now in the thousands, and still Trump hasn't found the winning hand. Rory Challens, Al Jazeera.
Let's bring in Rosalind Jordan, who is at the White House, and Manuel Rapallo, who is standing by at the State Department. Rosalind, to you first. Donald Trump has really ratcheted up these threats against Iran. Do we have a sense of how far militarily he is willing to go?
The U.S. President Donald Trump has said several times this week that he is willing to expand U.S. military action against Iran, and not just targeting military facilities, storage depots, missile launch sites, vessels that may still exist as part of the Iranian Navy, but he has also raised the specter of targeting what can be considered civilian targets, power plants, bridges, and other parts of the Iranian infrastructure. That is legally very questionable. That has brought criticism against the Trump administration before, earlier in this war. But Donald Trump says he is committed to making the Iranians actually agree to a deal that would ensure not just U.S. national security, but global security as well. One of the Trump administration's main tenets is that it does not want to see Iran develop a nuclear weapon arsenal. It also does not want to see Iran continue to carry out what the U.S. calls human rights violations, arresting, punishing, and killing people for expressing political views not in sync with that of the central government in Tehran. So while Donald Trump says there is still a possibility for diplomacy, right now his commitment, he says, is to ratcheting up military action against the Iranian government.
All right, thank you, Rosalind Jordan there at the White House. Let's go over to Manuel Rapallo at the State Department. Manuel, in terms of diplomatic options, what are still available?
Well, the signaling that we're hearing from U.S. officials, at least here at the U.S. State Department, is that military pressure and diplomacy are not mutually exclusive here. Administration officials, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, have said repeatedly and consistently that the preference is diplomacy. But the argument from the Trump White House has been that deterrence is still necessary, which is why they're pursuing this sort of two-pronged parallel approach: military pressure, economic pressure, alongside diplomacy. The argument is that any agreements that have been made, including the recent MOU, have failed because of violations on the side of Tehran here, leaving Washington with little other option other than to increase its military pressure. So from a diplomatic point of view, yes, the momentum when it comes to diplomacy has started to stall, you might say. We've seen a focus more on military pressure, on economic pressure. But with that said, there is a separate diplomatic track that's taking place. We can point to Secretary of State Marco Rubio's recent meeting on Tuesday with the Jordanian Foreign Minister. President Trump met with the new Prime Minister of Iraq, also at the White House on Tuesday. All of these bilateral and multilateral meetings that are taking place on the periphery are all part of the broader diplomatic effort, not only to stabilize the region, but to bring the conflict with Iran toward a diplomatic off-ramp and also prevent the sort of spillover that could lead to a scenario where the wider region could be pulled into a broader conflict.
Yeah, a flurry of diplomatic activity. Of course, the question is, will it actually lead to anything? Manuel Rapallo at the State Department, thank you so much. Joining us to discuss this further is David Hale. He's a former U.S. ambassador and special envoy for Middle East peace, as well as Robert Obeda, the former director for maritime industrial policy at the National Security Council at the White House. Ambassador Robert, thank you both for joining us as things really escalate quite dramatically. It is clear that this war is back on and that for now the ceasefire is dead. Trump talking about ratcheting up the targeting of Iran. I want to play a little bit more of what may be coming.
We're going to hit them very hard tonight. We're going to hit them very hard tomorrow night. We're going to hit them very hard the night after. And then next week it gets really bad for them because next week comes the power plants. Next week comes the bridges. We're going to knock out all their power plants. We're going to knock out all their bridges unless they get to the table and negotiate.
So Trump there really laying out what could be coming down the pike for Iran. Ambassador, when you hear the president talk like that and what you've seen over the course of the past few days, does this feel like a punch on the nose, if you will, to get the talks back on track? Or is the U.S. really settling into a more prolonged military campaign?
I think my reading, anyway, of the president's approach to this is that he's trying to restore deterrence, which had been lost in perhaps an overeager, at least perceived by the Iranians as an overeager American effort to get these negotiations going. And I think they tried to exploit that and see what further control they could, extract from the whole situation. So I think the president is, whether it's intended to resume negotiations or intended to hunker down into a long-term conflict, either way, a necessary first step is restoring deterrence.
And of course, in terms of what could happen militarily, a major question is whether the U.S. sends in forces on the ground. Do you see any signals pointing to that possibility?
Not yet. I do think that if there's going to be a long-term strategy to secure the Strait of Hormuz, to open it for free navigation, it's probably going to entail a much more significant deployment than the American public is yet prepared for.
Robert, this blockade, which had been briefly lifted when the ceasefire was struck, is now back on. What do you think the administration thinks they can accomplish, and how different would it be from the last blockade?
I think they're looking to gain leverage so that they can go back to the negotiating table and have with an upper hand, right? The intent is to deny Iranian access to the Strait while preserving freedom of navigation, which inherently gives us an upper hand at the negotiating table.
And how different is that from what we actually saw before? Because the blockade went into effect not long after the war started at the end of February.
I think on the surface, it's not very different. The objective remains the same. I think that the tools that we're applying there are changing quite a lot, actually. And so it remains to be seen whether or not this will give us the leverage that we need to come to a lasting agreement, diplomatic agreement.
Obviously, the Strait of Hormuz is something that we're going to be discussing in depth today. So I want to provide a little bit more context for our viewers. This is a major point of contention between Iran and the U.S., of course, competing claims from either side over security and the flow of global energy through that very strategic waterway. Our Eva McCann explains.
The Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important maritime choke points. At its narrowest point, it's only about 20 miles, or roughly 33 kilometers wide. But this narrow corridor connects the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. Roughly 1/5 of the world's oil moves through here, along with other critical energy supplies headed to markets around the globe. Now, on a typical day, more than 100 oil tankers and commercial vessels transit these shipping lanes. During the latest exchange of strikes between the United States and Iran, traffic slowed dramatically as shipping companies reassessed the risk. Some vessels delayed entering the strait, others waited offshore. This all spells chaos. Insurance costs climbed, freight rates increased, oil prices surged in their highest daily jump in 6 years, as traders worried the conflict could again disrupt global supplies. Now, a U.S. military blockade is back in effect, enforced by 20 U.S. Navy warships and hundreds of aircraft operating in the region. The administration says it is aimed at restricting Iranian maritime activity, not closing the Strait of Hormuz to all commercial traffic. Iran says its control over the strait will not be compromised. But even when shipping lanes remain technically open, heightened military activity can make companies think twice before sending vessels through one of the world's busiest energy corridors. So in the coming days, we wait and watch whether commercial traffic can recover, whether oil prices continue to climb, and whether either side escalates in a way that makes this narrow stretch of water even more dangerous.
Ambassador Hale, have you heard from this administration any kind of coherent explanation of what the end game is and where they want to be? Are we essentially trying to get back to a place where we were before, the free flow of commerce through Hormuz?
Well, I think the situation in Hormuz is an immediate, obviously, problem that needs to be tackled. But the longer-term strategy, as I interpret it, and the administration has said varying things, but is to neutralize Iran, to make sure that it can no longer project power in the region the way it did before. I mean, before 2023, they were setting the timetable through violence in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Gaza, through proxies and directly with the Yemenis. So I think it is to turn the table against that. And actually, there's been a great deal of progress in that, but it has not been brought to completion.
Robert, do you see a strategy here that makes sense, or does it feel like, as some have said, jazz to some extent, that they're making it up as they go along?
No, I don't think they're making it up as they go along. I think conflicts are dynamic and constantly changing. You have, 3 traditional instruments available to you when you're engaging on this front. You have the military, you have economic measures, and you have diplomacy. You're constantly tweaking them to accomplish your objectives as things change. So I think, it's just a reflection of the fact that, the only thing certain about war is that it's uncertain, and you constantly have to adjust.
And there are obviously a lot of other partners for both countries that would like to see this come to an end quite quickly. In terms of mediators, we've seen the Pakistanis have a central role, the Qataris, the Omanis. Ambassador, how frantically are these mediators trying to get the parties back to the table? And how are the regional allies of the U.S., the Gulf allies, feeling right now?
Yeah, well, my guess is that the Qataris and the Pakistanis in particular, who have big fingerprints on this agreement, are trying to restore some semblance of negotiations. The problem is the Iranians are showing disrespect for everybody. They're not acting in good faith. So I doubt that they're going to be able to launch anything meaningful very fast. What I've seen in the last, this period of conflict is that the Gulf states are actually uniting behind America and against Iran. That Iranian behavior is not winning them friends, it's winning them enemies throughout the region. So while there may be differences from one state to the other in terms of degree of vulnerability, all of them understand that the American security umbrella is their necessary future.
When you look at what's going on in the Strait, Robert, do you think that Iran is flexing that leverage in a way that they have not before?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we've seen is that Iran has determined that they don't actually need to beat the U.S. Navy to get the leverage that they're looking for, right? All they need to do is create enough uncertainty to scare shippers and insurance providers and energy markets in order to get that leverage. So they're absolutely using it in a new way.
Why can't American firepower, overwhelming American firepower, certainly when you compare the two militaries, why can't the U.S. solve things that way?
Because I think fundamentally this isn't a military problem, right? You can provide a certain level of security for vessels, but you just can't eliminate risk. And I think that uncertainty is ultimately what the private industry and commercial markets look to. The military has to be coupled with economic measures and diplomacy in order for this to be truly successful.
On the diplomatic side, Ambassador, you just mentioned the Iranians and the lack of good faith efforts. And one other thing that's also been reported is a divide among the Iranian negotiators, let's say the IRGC versus some of the others. How important do you think that schism is in terms of being able to get to a more peaceful stage?
I personally think it tends to be exaggerated. The people in charge are the IRGC. That's what we saw during the prolonged funeral arrangements for the late Ayatollah. And they're going to call the shots at the end of the day. Now, they may want one day to show a more pragmatic face to the world and another day to show a more violent face, and that is what we're seeing. On again, off again negotiations, on again, off again violence.
The document that took us to the ceasefire that has now been broken was called an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding. And this is the part about the Strait of Hormuz. Quote, Iran will make arrangements using its best efforts for the safe passage of commercial vessels with no charge for 60 days only. Robert, that strikes me as extremely vague, and it now seems the two sides are interpreting that differently.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I mean, the ambassador knows better than I do, but when you're negotiating these agreements, you start with the sort of low-hanging fruit that brings you closer to the middle, and you're left with the hard-charging issues. And oftentimes, you insert a degree of ambiguity there to, ensure that you have the ability to maneuver. At the end of the day, as he mentioned earlier, it all boils down to the actions you take after that. And if the Iranians are not going to stick to the intent of the MOU, then it all sort of falls apart.
One notion. Go ahead, Ambassador.
Well, I react a bit to the idea that somehow this agreement gave the Iranians carte blanche, that if they were unhappy with the arrangements to facilitate the freedom of navigation through the straits, that they could then just bomb things. That's not what the agreement says. And an MOU is a statement of intent. So if there's no goodwill and no good intent, then it's useless. And that is what we're reacting to.
What explanation is there for the Iranians going out and bombing commercial ships?
Because I think they thought that the American administration was so keen to get an agreement and into negotiations that the Iranians had their own calculation about our midterms and the economic costs, and they were interpreting statements in our politics and thought that the president was just going to go along with this. Well, he didn't. So they miscalculated.
One notion that has been now raised by both sides is one of tolls or fees for passage in the Strait of Hormuz. The president said yesterday that the U.S. would apply it. He then quickly backtracked that. And then he also said on Tuesday that the Gulf countries had proposed an alternative. Take a listen.
I don't think anybody should be able to charge a fee for the Strait or for any other Strait relationship in terms of other sections of the world. I don't think anybody should be really in that position. But we were doing it as a reimbursement. The Gulf states are going to invest a tremendous amount of money into the United States, and that was very satisfactory to me. I think it's actually much better.
Robert, what do you make of this whiplash of American positions?
Strategic adjustments, they happen all the time. Again, the objective here is to create leverage that you can bring to the negotiating table over the Iranians. It's not to get leverage over our partners and allies. In fact, having their support as a coalition gives us the leverage that we're looking for. So it's an adjustment.
When it comes to oil prices, there's been a lot of discussion around that. Obviously, they've gone up in the past few days. We are looking at the midterms in just a couple of months. Obviously, this is a very politically sensitive issue. Ambassador, how sensitive do you think this administration is to those rising oil and then gas prices?
Well, no one wants to lose an election. And obviously, Americans are concerned about inflation, and gas prices are a big part of that. But I've never, I was a State Department diplomat 1984 to just a few years ago, and I've never seen a president change his foreign policy because of a midterm election calculation, even when it was so obvious that a course correction might have helped. 2006, I think, was the most prominent example with George W. Bush and the Iraq War.
Perhaps particularly because this president's not running again, as far as we know.
Possibly.
I want to play a remarkable piece of video for our viewers that Central Command, CENTCOM, which is carrying out the military operation in the region, released a few days ago. It's the first time that they have shown sea drones in combat. And the video that they posted shows 3 of these sea drones striking an Iranian submarine and a ship maintenance facility. Robert, when you look at this video from CENTCOM, what do you make of them releasing it, and really what it means for the future of warfare and maritime security?
Yeah, I think it's remarkable. I think it's the first time that the United States has used vessel-like drones in combat, and the decision to release this video was intended to send a message to the Iranians. It's a preview of what's to come, and what's to come is the use of a small number of high-end naval vessels to secure the Strait is not a long-term strategy, but instead the use of sort of autonomous vessels that allow for a persistent presence in the maritime domain is the future and what's to come.
And now you are in the private sector, still obviously dealing with maritime issues. How much are sea drones a part of the conversation, whether they're American or belong to others?
They're very much a part of the conversation. They have been in the Ukraine for a long time, and I think the United States military is starting to really take them seriously and see them as a tool that they can use to maintain leverage in situations like this.
Yeah, for years we have seen the Ukrainians using the equivalent to great effect against the Russians, and so this is in some ways the U.S. catching up to what the Ukrainians have taught us, and there are many examples of that. Ambassador, as you noted, you were a diplomat for a long time all across the region. When you look at what is happening now and what might be coming, how worried are you about this spreading and Iranian proxies like the Houthis having a more active role, or do you think it could stay relatively contained?
I think momentum is working against the Iranians. Their proxies, these key ones, have really been decimated. They still have potency, but they're nothing like what they were before. I'm talking about Hezbollah, Hamas. We've seen the Iraqi prime ministers here in Washington talking about our alliance and our relationship there to deal with the Iranian problem. There are talks going on in Rome between the Lebanese and Israelis to deal with the common problem of Iran and Hezbollah. Obviously, the Iranians and Hezbollah are not going to just stand aside and let this happen. They will fight back. They will try to use violence and terrorism to undercut these things, and we need to be alert to that, but not deterred by those kinds of threats.
When the U.S. goes back to war and ratchets things up the way that we have seen and we could see, what does that mean for the strength of the Iranian regime?
It's very resilient. There's no denying that, partly because they really don't care about the fate of their people. I mean, I don't know what the real numbers are, but there are estimates of 30 to 35,000 were slaughtered in January. So they don't care about the economic pressure on their people. They do about the economic pressure on their regime. And so we have to have a long-term, persistent strategy that combines the elements that Robert was outlining: military, economic, political, diplomatic pressure, and stick to it. Because one of the problems with American foreign policy in this part of the world is persistence. We often lose interest or lose our stomach for what's going on.
But to that point, Robert, how long can the U.S. persist when it comes to this blockade? It can't go on endlessly.
I think the U.S. can sustain this for quite a long time. You know, we've seen that the short-term strategy here is to use naval vessels. We've seen from that video that there's a long-term strategy that doesn't require deploying exquisite assets into the region. So we can sustain this for quite a while. I think the real question is whether or not sustained presence is going to give us the leverage that we need at the negotiating table.
I think we'd be remiss, Ambassador, if we didn't mention Israel in this conversation. Of course, they have played a huge role in this. They helped co-launch the war, if you will. They helped take out the supreme leader. And yet they've been relatively sidelined. Where do you think they stand in their eagerness to get back involved militarily?
Well, the war has been quite popular in Israel,
right.
The conduct of the conflict. And there's an election coming at the end of October, so that is going to influence everything. I think that the Israeli leadership was quite concerned about the direction of the U.S.-Iran MOU. We have seen some of the vulnerabilities in that agreement. It's now back on track in a way I think the Israelis are probably much more comfortable with. Look, the gap between America and Iran is enormous on the issues that divide us. So we in Israel and our Arab allies have to think again about a long-term game plan here. We can't think in terms of short-term victories. Long-term success means a long-term strategy.
And then, of course, there's the nuclear file. And we only have a couple moments left. But if the war ended today, the Strait opened back up, there's still a long way in terms of bridging the any kind of agreement when it comes to nuclear issues.
Yes, and so we may have to continue to be vigilant and use our intelligence and our military assets to make sure that that program doesn't get any closer to realization.
Robert, before I let you go, we just have a couple seconds left. How do you see things playing out in the Strait in the next few days? I was looking at a maritime traffic map today. It's quite crowded in there.
It does, but I don't think it takes much to create uncertainty, and ultimately that leads to the disruptions that everybody's so concerned about. So I think the sooner that we are able to deploy large fleets of autonomous vessels that can maintain persistent presence, the better for everybody.
All right. Robert Obeda, who is at the National Security Council under President Joe Biden. David Hale, old Middle East hand as U.S. Ambassador and Special Envoy for Middle East Peace. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And that's all from the team here in Washington. I'm going to hand back to Rosalind Jordan at the White House and Al Jazeera's global headquarters in Doha. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Alex. We'll be back tomorrow with another edition of This is America. That's at 18:30 GMT, Monday through Friday, or if you're here in the United States, 2:30 p.m. Eastern. Have a good one.